I died choking on my own blood, while my twin sister laughed, stealing my billionaire husband. Then I opened my eyes. We had gone back in time. When she desperately demanded to switch our fiancés, thinking she was stealing my future empire, I smiled and said yes. She had no idea. The cold, polished marble of the St. Regis penthouse floor was the last thing I felt in my previous life. That and the agonizing, burning sensation of the poisoned champagne tearing through my throat. Above me, my twin sister Katrina stood draped in the custom Oscar de la Renta gown that was supposed to be mine. She was smiling, her eyes devoid of any familial warmth, casually holding the empty crystal flute. Beside her stood my husband, Harrison Gallagher, the tech billionaire I had literally built from the ground up. He wouldn't even look at me as my lungs seized and my vision faded to black. "You worked so hard, Carice," Katrina had whispered, crouching down to stroke my hair. "But I think I'm much better suited for the high life, don't you? Enjoy your rest." Then, absolute darkness. I expected the afterlife. I expected the void. Instead, I gasped sharply, my lungs suddenly filling with the rich, cherry tobacco-scented air of my grandfather's study. My eyes snapped open. I was no longer dying on the floor of a Manhattan penthouse. I was sitting upright in a plush leather wingback chair. The afternoon sun was streaming brightly through the massive bay windows, illuminating the sprawling, manicured lawns of the Montgomery estate in Connecticut. "Well?" The gruff, impatient voice of my grandfather, Richard Montgomery, startled me. "I don't have all day, girls. The Rivera and Gallagher families are waiting for our answer by this evening. Which of you will take the Rivera heir, and who will take the Gallagher boy?" My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down at my hands. They were soft, unblemished, completely free of the calluses I had developed from years of typing code until my fingers bled, and working double shifts as a diner waitress in Queens just to keep the lights on. I looked up and saw Katrina sitting across from me. She looked pale, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy that I had never seen before. We had returned. It was the summer of 2016, exactly 10 years before my murder. The day our fates were decided. In our previous life, the choice had been incredibly simple. Arthur Rivera was the sole heir to Rivera Global Logistics, a century-old shipping and freight empire. He was aristocratic, wealthy, and commanded respect everywhere from Wall Street to London. Harrison Gallagher, on the other hand, was the illegitimate, disgraced son of a Texas oil baron, entirely cut off from his family's wealth and currently living in a crumbling, roach-infested studio apartment in Brooklyn. In that life, Katrina had practically thrown herself across the desk at Arthur's file, eager to become the lady of a billionaire's manor. I, the quiet, dutiful twin, had accepted Harrison without complaint to fulfill our family's obligation. But Katrina hadn't known that Arthur's company was secretly rotting from the inside, drowning in hidden debt and corporate espionage. Nor did she realize that she was utterly incapable of managing a household, let alone navigating a corporate crisis. She had embezzled what little liquid cash Arthur had left to fuel her secret gambling addiction at underground tables in Atlantic City. Her betrayals drove Arthur to ruin, and eventually, after the board ousted him, he took his own life. Katrina was left penniless, disgraced, and bitter. Meanwhile, I had moved into Harrison's dismal apartment. I had paid his rent, bought his groceries, and when he drunkenly mumbled an idea for a decentralized data streaming protocol, I was the one who sat up for 72 hours straight, writing the foundational Python architecture. I was the one who pitched it to Sequoia Capital while he slept off hangovers. I built the OmniStream empire. Harrison was nothing but the handsome, charismatic face on the cover of Forbes. I was the brain, the engine, and the sole reason he was worth billions. Katrina had watched my rise from the ashes of her own ruin with venomous jealousy, and in the end, she had murdered me to take it all away. "I want Harrison." Katrina's sudden shriek snapped me out of my memories. She lunged forward, her manicured hands slamming onto the mahogany desk as she snatched the thin, unpromising file belonging to Harrison Gallagher. Grandfather Richard raised a thick white eyebrow, clearly taken aback. Harrison? The bastard son? Katrina, are you out of your mind? He has no trust fund. He has absolutely nothing to his name. Arthur Rivera is practically American royalty. I don't care about old money, grandfather, Katrina proclaimed, pressing Harrison's file to her chest like a shield. She looked at me, a triumphant, malicious gleam dancing in her eyes. I love him. I've met him in secret, and I know he has a brilliant mind. He's going to change the world. Karis is much better suited for the quiet, traditional life with Arthur anyway. Right, Karis? She thought she was a genius. She thought Harrison's billionaire status in our past life was an inevitability, a stroke of pure destiny that would magically happen regardless of who stood beside him. She thought she was stealing my golden goose, skipping the hard work and going straight to the Forbes list. I looked at my twin sister. I saw the greed, the cruel calculation, and the utter pathetic delusion. The rage that had boiled within me during my final moments cooled into something much more dangerous, an icy, unyielding clarity. If that is what Katrina truly wants, grandfather, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly composed. I reached out and gently rested my hand on the thick, leather-bound dossier of Arthur Rivera. I would be honored to accept Arthur's proposal. Katrina exhaled a sharp breath, her shoulders sagging in profound relief. She shot me a pitying, almost mocking look. Thank you, Charis. I promise you're making the right choice. Oh, Katrina, I thought, a ghost of a smile touching my lips as I tapped Arthur's file. You have absolutely no idea. The weddings took place exactly 1 month later. Because Katrina had chosen the disgraced son, grandfather refused to throw her a lavish affair. She and Harrison were married in a quick, drab ceremony at City Hall. I watched from the back of the room as Katrina, wearing a simple white dress she had clearly bought off the rack, smiled brightly at Harrison. She looked at him not with love, but with the ravenous hunger of a woman staring at a winning lottery ticket. Harrison just looked confused, likely wondering why a wealthy Montgomery heiress had thrown away her luxury to live with him. My wedding to Arthur, however, was the social event of the season. Held at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, it was a masterclass in high society theater. Arthur and I barely spoke during the reception. He was strikingly handsome, tall, sharp-jawed, with cold, calculating gray eyes, but he looked utterly exhausted. He moved rigidly, clearly viewing me as just another corporate obligation, or worse, another vapid socialite here to drain his remaining resources. He didn't know I already knew his secrets. The day after we returned from our obligatory, tension-filled honeymoon in Aspen, I walked into Arthur's private home office. He was hunched over his desk, rubbing his temples, a half-empty glass of scotch sitting next to a pile of financial reports. He looked up, his jaw clenching. Karis, if you're looking for the black Amex, it's on the dresser. Just keep it under $50,000 this month, please. We have liquidity issues. I didn't go to the dresser. Instead, I walked to his desk, took the glass of scotch out of his hand, and set down a USB drive right in front of him. I don't want your credit card, Arthur, I said, pulling up a chair and sitting directly across from him. I want your chief financial officer, David Carmichael, fired by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Arthur froze. His eyes narrowed, suddenly entirely alert. Excuse me? Carmichael has been funneling Rivera Global's operational funds into offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands for the past 18 months, I stated calmly, relying entirely on the devastating truths Katrina had blindly ignored in our past life. He's preparing to force a massive default on your shipping container leases with the European ports, which will tank your stock just in time for a hostile takeover by your uncle's conglomerate. The proof is on that drive. Account numbers, wire transfer logs, and Carmichael's private emails. Arthur stared at me, the silence in the room stretching so tight it felt like a wire about to snap. He slowly reached out and picked up the USB drive. How? How could you possibly know this? I've had forensic accountants looking at our books for 3 months, and they found nothing. Because your accountants are looking for math errors, I replied smoothly. I'm looking at the people. You married a Montgomery, Arthur. Did you really think I was going to sit by the pool while my new empire burns to the ground? We are partners now, and I intend to win. For the first time since we met, a genuine spark of respect ignited in Arthur's cold gray eyes. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto his face. Well, Mrs. Rivera, it seems I severely underestimated you. Meanwhile, all the way across the bridge in Bushwick, Katrina's grand fantasy was violently colliding with reality. She had moved into Harrison's cramped studio apartment. In her mind, this was just a brief, quirky, transitional phase. A fun story she would tell interviewers on CNN in a few years about their humble beginnings. But a week passed. Then a month. Harrison didn't invent anything. He spent his days sleeping until noon, playing Call of Duty in his boxers, and ordering cheap takeout using the meager allowance grandfather still sent Katrina. Whenever Katrina tried to gently prod him about the future, disaster struck. Harry, honey. Katrina had purred one evening, pinching her nose against the smell of stale pizza crusts as she sat on their sagging futon. When are you going to start working on that? Streaming software idea? You know, OmniStream? Harrison paused his game, looking over his shoulder with a blank expression. Omni what? What are you talking about? Katrina's smile faltered. Your big tech idea, the decentralized protocol. Harrison laughed, tossing a crushed beer can into the overflowing trash. Babe, I don't know what a decentralized protocol is. I failed high school algebra. I just told you I wanted to make an app for gamers once to sound impressive at a bar. I'm an ideas guy, not a nerd. Pass me the Doritos, will you? In that moment, Katrina felt the blood drain completely from her face. She rushed to the tiny, grimy bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out her phone. Her hands shook as she opened Instagram. She expected to see me miserable. She expected to see Arthur Rivera plastered on the tabloids for bankruptcy. Instead, her feed was dominated by a breaking news article from the Wall Street Journal. Rivera Global rebounds. CEO Arthur Rivera and wife Karis Montgomery oust corrupt board. Secure dollar, 500 meters in new backing from Goldman Sachs. Beneath the headline was a high-resolution photo of Arthur and me walking out of a boardroom in Manhattan. I was wearing a sharp, tailored Saint Laurent suit, and Arthur was looking down at me, not with the coldness of a forced husband, but with fierce, undeniable admiration. In the dirty mirror of a Brooklyn bathroom, Katrina finally began to realize the catastrophic truth. Destiny wasn't a script you could just steal. It was built, and she had just given up the architect. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the Rivera Global headquarters in Lower Manhattan, blurring the glittering skyline into a smudge of gray and gold. Karis Montgomery, now Karis Rivera, stood impeccably still, her reflection superimposed over the towering skyscrapers. She wore a tailored charcoal Dior suit, her posture radiating absolute authority. The Wall Street Journal article had been merely the opening salvo. In the 8 months since her arranged marriage to Arthur Rivera, Karis had not merely integrated into his corporate empire. She had fundamentally restructured its DNA. Arthur walked into the boardroom, tossing a leather portfolio onto the mahogany table. The exhaustion that had plagued him during their honeymoon was entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory energy. He poured 2 glasses of Macallan and handed one to Karis. J.P. Morgan just signed off on the restructuring plan, Arthur announced, his voice carrying a resonant thrum of triumph. The offshore accounts that Carmichael drained have been seized and liquidated, and the European port leases are secured for the next decade. We didn't just avoid bankruptcy, Karis. We are posting record profits for the 3rd quarter. Karis accepted the glass, the crystal cool against her skin. Profits are a byproduct of discipline, Arthur. The board was infected with complacency. Now that the rot has been excised, we can focus on the real objective, the automated logistics infrastructure. Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd are still relying on outdated predictive models. We are going to corner the market on decentralized freight tracking. Arthur looked at her, his cold gray eyes softening into something resembling awe. In their previous timeline, he had been a man drowning in betrayal, married to a woman who saw him only as a bottomless ATM. Now he was standing beside a visionary. "You realize," he murmured, stepping closer, "that I would have lost everything if you hadn't walked into my office that morning with that USB drive. I thought I was marrying a socialite. I didn't know I was marrying a general." "We are partners, Arthur," Cheris replied smoothly, clinking her glass against his. "And partners protect their investments." Across the East River, desperation carried a distinct metallic scent, a mixture of rust, cheap beer, and accumulating garbage. Katrina Montgomery sat on the edge of a sagging mattress in a dilapidated motel room in Queens. The Brooklyn studio had been lost 3 months ago, when the eviction marshals finally changed the locks. Harrison Gallagher, the man she had sacrificed her billionaire destiny for, was currently asleep on the floor, snoring loudly amid a sea of discarded lottery tickets and empty takeout containers. Katrina's manicured hands, once perfect, were chipped and trembling. She stared at the cracked screen of her iPhone, scrolling obsessively through Bloomberg News. Every headline seemed to mock her existence. Karis Rivera named one of Forbes' most powerful women in business. Rivera Global acquires massive automated fleet. Arthur and Karis Rivera dazzle at the Met Gala. Bile rose in Katrina's throat. It was supposed to be her. She had chosen the genius. She had chosen the man who was supposed to invent OmniStream and become a tech god. "Harry," Katrina croaked, kicking his shin. "Harry, wake up. You need to code. You need to build the platform." Harrison groaned, swatting her foot away. "Shut up, Katrina. I'm hungover. I told you, I don't know how to code. I'm an entrepreneur. I need venture capital first. Then I hire the nerds to do the computer stuff." "You had venture capital!" Katrina screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. In the other, you are supposed to be brilliant. You are supposed to be a billionaire." Harrison sat up, his handsome face twisting into an ugly sneer. "And you were supposed to be a rich heiress, but your grandfather cut you off because you won't stop acting like a lunatic. I'm going to the bar. Don't wait up." He grabbed a crumpled $20 bill from her purse and slammed the door behind him. Silence suffocated the dingy room. Katrina pulled her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth. The delusion that had carried her through the time jump was fracturing, leaving behind a terrifying, jagged reality. Destiny was not a magical aura that clung to Harrison Gallagher. The billionaire she had lusted after in her past life had been manufactured, and the manufacturer was currently sitting on a throne in Manhattan. Driven by a blinding, venomous panic, Katrina realized she had to steal the idea back. She had overheard Karis and Harrison talking about OmniStream in the past life. She remembered the buzzwords. Decentralized. P. 2. P. Networking. Algorithmic data compression. The next morning, Katrina dressed in her last clean designer outfit, a wrinkled Chanel blazer, and marched into the offices of Apex Ventures in Midtown. She had managed to secure a 10-minute pitch meeting by aggressively name-dropping the Montgomery family legacy. Preston, a junior partner at Apex, sat across from her, looking politely skeptical. "So, Miss Montgomery, you're pitching a revolutionary streaming architecture. Where is your technical co-founder? Do you have a prototype? A GitHub repository we can review?" Katrina smiled, though her facial muscles twitched. "I am the visionary, Preston. The code it's being finalized. But the concept is a decentralized protocol. It connects the computers to make the video go faster without the central server slowing it down." Preston blinked. "That's just a definition of peer-to-peer networking, which has existed for decades. What is your proprietary compression algorithm? Are you using a blockchain ledger for bandwidth verification, or a localized mesh network?" Katrina stared at him, her mind a blank, terrifying void. "It uses the Omni protocol. It's very advanced. We just need $5 million to build the interface." Preston sighed, closing his notebook. "Miss Montgomery, I don't mean to be rude, but you clearly have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You lack even a rudimentary understanding of software architecture. Please, see yourself out." Humiliated and burning with rage, Katrina stumbled out of the building. She was entirely out of money. The motel was demanding rent. Harrison was threatening to leave her. In a state of complete moral collapse, Katrina walked into a Chase Bank branch on Fifth Avenue. Using the Montgomery family account numbers she had memorized years ago, she presented a forged letter of authorization, impeccably mimicking Grandfather Richard's sprawling signature. She authorized a transfer of $500,000 into a private offshore account. It was a desperate, incredibly stupid gamble, but in her mind, she was just taking an advance on the inheritance that was rightfully hers. She would hire developers, build OmniStream, and destroy Karis. She just needed a little time. 3 years evaporated into history, cementing the Rivera Empire as an untouchable monolith. The grand ballroom of the Museum of Modern Art in New York was bathed in a wash of sapphire and silver light. Hundreds of the world's most influential figures, tech titans, politicians, and Wall Street magnates milled about, sipping vintage Dom Perignon. Tonight was the official launch of Aura, Rivera Global's proprietary AI logistics network. It was a system so advanced it could predict global supply chain disruptions weeks before they happened. Arthur Rivera stood by the main podium, looking out over the crowd. He was a man transformed, exuding a quiet, impenetrable confidence. But as the lights dimmed, he did not step up to the microphone. Instead, he turned and extended his hand to his wife. Karis approached the podium wearing a breathtaking, custom-made midnight blue gown. The room fell into an immediate, reverent hush. She was no longer just the Montgomery heiress. She was the architect of a new era of global trade. 3 years ago, Rivera Global was a sinking ship, weighed down by archaic practices and internal corruption, Charis began, her voice ringing clear and authoritative across the silent ballroom. Tonight, we do not merely launch a software platform. We launch the central nervous system of global commerce. Suddenly, a sharp, violent crash shattered the elegance of the moment. At the back of the ballroom, a tray of champagne flutes shattered against the marble floor. The crowd parted in alarm as a disheveled, frantic figure pushed her way through the elite attendees. It was Katrina. She looked unrecognizable. The Chanel blazer was stained and fraying. Her hair was unkempt, and her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely unhinged. Behind her, 2 frantic security guards were trying to grab her arms, but she fought them off with animalistic desperation. "Liar!" Katrina shrieked, her voice echoing horribly off the high ceilings. "You stole it from me! You stole my life, Karis!" The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Arthur immediately stepped in front of Karis, his expression hardening into granite. "Security, get this woman out of here immediately." "No!" Katrina screamed, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at Charis. "She cheated. We came back, and she stole my billionaire. Harrison was supposed to build the empire. You tricked me into taking him so you could have Arthur and all this money." Karis gently placed a hand on Arthur's arm, moving him aside. She looked down at her twin sister from the elevated stage. There was no anger in Karis's eyes, only a cold, clinical pity. "Katrina," Charis said, her voice perfectly amplified by the microphone, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Harrison Gallagher was never a genius. He never built OmniStream. I did. In our previous life, I wrote every single line of code while he slept. I pitched to the venture capitalists. I built the empire. You didn't steal my destiny when you chose him. You just chose a parasite, thinking he was the host." Katrina froze, the blood draining completely from her face. The manic energy that had propelled her into the room vanished, replaced by a crushing, suffocating realization. No, that's impossible. He was on the cover of Forbes. "Because the world likes a charismatic frontman," Karis replied ruthlessly, "but the intellect was always mine. You thought you could take a shortcut to the top by stealing the man you thought was destined for greatness. But destiny isn't handed out, Katrina. It is built. And you have never built a single thing in your miserable life." Before Katrina could formulate a response, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open again. 4 uniformed officers from the New York Police Department walked in, flanked by a stern-looking detective. Katrina Montgomery, the detective announced, his voice carrying over the dead silent room. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the forgery of signatures belonging to Richard Montgomery. You have the right to remain silent. Katrina let out a pathetic, keening wail as the officers quickly advanced, securing her hands behind her back in heavy steel cuffs. She looked wildly around the room, begging for someone, anyone, to intervene. She looked at Grandfather Richard, who was standing near the front row. He simply turned his back in disgust. She looked at Arthur, who stared at her as if she were an insect. Finally, she looked at Karis. "Karis, please!" Katrina sobbed. The fight completely drained out of her as the officers began to drag her away. "I'm your sister! We have the same blood! Please, give me my life back!" "You have exactly the life you earned," Charis said softly, stepping away from the microphone. The heavy doors closed, cutting off Katrina's screams. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Slowly, smoothly, Karis stepped back up to the podium, adjusting her notes as if a minor pest had just been swatted away. "As I was saying," Charis continued, a faint, victorious smile playing on her lips. "Aura represents the future, a future where efficiency replaces chaos, and where true value is always recognized." Later that night, long after the press had gone and the ballroom was empty, Karis and Arthur stood on the balcony of their penthouse, looking out over the glittering expanse of Manhattan. The city lights mirrored the stars, a sprawling kingdom of their own design. Arthur wrapped his arms around Charis from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You were magnificent tonight," he murmured. "Though, I must admit, I almost felt sorry for her." Karis leaned back against his chest, sipping her champagne. She thought of the poisoned glass from a life she had long since left behind. She thought of the dark void, and the second chance she had seized with both hands. "Don't waste your pity, Arthur," Charis whispered, watching the city below. "Some people are destined to rule the empire. Others are just destined to watch it be built." If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of rebirth, betrayal, and ultimate justice, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below telling us what you would do if you were reborn and faced with the ultimate choice. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling story. See you in the next video.